Well, it's time now to cross to Cape Town, where business leaders and key stakeholders have gathered to plot the way forward for Africa at the WEF Africa Conference. Standing by is Chris Bishop. Chris, I'm sure you've been speaking to a lot of people on your end. I mean, what's the mood like there? What are the type of comments that are coming through this time around?
Well, great expectation in the fact that tomorrow 1,000 people will turn up, at least 13 head of state will be here from Nigeria to Tanzania, and the talk will be of infrastructure as one of the big topics will be here tomorrow. Also, there will be the relations between Nigeria and South Africa as well. That'll be one of the big high agenda things, but particularly infrastructure. And the guest I have in the studio with me here is Gachao Kuina, and he's the head of Transcentury, a company that specializes in making money out of putting infrastructure in Africa. Now, what is the feeling you're getting about the amount of money there is available? It's been said to me here today that the capital market's very shallow and it's tough to raise money for infrastructure. What feeling are you getting with your Kenyan operation?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't agree with that. You know, I think there is still a lot of interest and a lot of capital, both domestic and foreign capital, that can come into infrastructure. I think there's different challenges for the different types of capital. I think for the domestic capital, it's more around legislation and really allowing people and the pension fund industry and the insurance industry to invest in this asset class outside of the sort of more traditional avenues. So I think that needs to be addressed. Once that happens, I think you'll see a lot of domestic investment coming. And from a foreign investment point of view, I think, you know, FDI likes to follow DDI. So I think if you can unlock the DDI, then there's a lot of FDI to come in.
I mean, infrastructure is seen as a long-term, almost a grudge purchase by governments sometimes. Do you think it's really a foreign investor's dream to get a return from investment in infrastructure?
You know, I always smile when people say that. When you're from a country where there's a lot of infrastructure, then I think you can afford to have that kind of attitude, right? I always tell people that, you know, no infrastructure is much worse than expensive infrastructure, right? And that's really where Africa is today, right? Is in so many instances, we just don't have the infrastructure that's required to really support these economies. And at the end of the day, it's a question of putting down the infrastructure that's required and not so much even about necessarily, you know, coming down to the best practice, you know, cost of it. So from an investor's perspective, it's a very good time to be in the field. From a government perspective, there's a huge realization that, you know, the challenge is so big that they cannot do everything, right? And, you know, where private capital is willing to come in and participate, I think that's obviously very welcome. Now, it's not in every single infrastructure opportunity that private capital will be best placed. You know, there's a lot of, you know what, I don't really like the term, but what people term as social infrastructure, obviously that's, you know, also critical. But, you know, it's a space that has a lot of growth, has very good stable yields, and has a very good long-term horizon, which is what every investor is looking for.
And there's a huge infrastructure gap, something like $93 billion, according to the World Bank. Now, you listed on the Nairobi Stock Exchange in 2011. How much of a bumpy ride has it been since then?
Yeah, it's been a bumpy ride. You know, I think what it is that once you're an infrastructure company, you need to have a long-term view. And I think this is something that you know, investors really need to come to terms with. You know, the African infrastructure story is it's not a 2-year story. It's not even a 5-year story. It's more like a 20-year story. So, I think from the Transcentury perspective, you know, if you look at the underlying investments we have, the fundamentals are very strong. The investments themselves are continuing to grow and perform, and you know, it's something where people will really start to see, you know, the scale of what we're trying to do, you know, after the sort of first 5 years that we do it. It's not something that you can necessarily deliver on, you know, in a 2-year time frame.
And how has your share price fared since you listed in 2011?
Well, generally, our share price has not fared very well, but nor has the Kenyan market particularly fared very well. I think for us in particular, there's been several, which is more the macroeconomic issues in Kenya, especially in 2012. You know, very high inflation rates. You know, a lot of capital was coming out of the capital markets to go and look for fixed income opportunities. So that, of course, hurt everybody, including Transcentury. But also, I think we have some fundamentally fantastic opportunities that we're executing on, which some people really find them as quite challenging investments. The railway is probably the iconic version of that, right? You know, it's fantastic opportunity, but if you look at it today, you may not quite understand why it's such a good opportunity.
And yourself and many other listed companies in Nairobi, you must be very relieved the election is now done and dusted, and there's at least some form of stability and certainty in policy in the years going ahead. What is the feeling at the moment?
Yeah, the feeling at the moment, I think there's a very positive in Kenya. I think it is true to say that the first quarter of this year was slow, and there was a lot of anticipation in terms of the election itself. But once that's come, behind us, I think people are really quite genuinely excited. You can start to see a lot of changes that were inevitable given the new government, the new constitution. So it's a new time for Kenya, and it's an exciting time.